get to work. You have an opportunity, that really has not existed. I mean, it just, to some extent, it doesn't exist at all. And in the country you come from. And I think maybe that's something that does help an immigrant writer or a writer who's not coming from mainstream America. I mean, to feel like what an incredible, historically, revolutionary opportunity you have.
Are you an aspiring creative in entertainment, business, fashion, design, or the arts? Do you want to elevate your creative passion project to the next level? Then this show is for you. Whether you want a career in television, film, radio, literature, music, or beyond, Creative Breakthrough will show you how to take your dreams and turn them into reality. This show will not only leave you feeling motivated and inspired, but also provide you real-life tools to pursue the creative journey you have always wanted. I'm your host, creative coach, and chicken wing lover, Shireen Kassab, aka the Funny Brown Girl. Yes, I have an unhealthy obsession with chicken wings. Now, get ready to flex your creative muscle. Jasmin Darznik's debut novel, Song of a Captive Bird, is a fictional account of Iran's trailblazing woman poet Forugh Farrokhzad. It was selected as a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, as well as one of 2018's best books by Vogue, Miss, and Newsweek. Jasmin is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Good Daughter, a memoir of my mother's hidden life. Her books have been published and are forthcoming in 17 countries, and her essays have appeared in numerous periodicals, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times. Jasmin was born in Tehran, Iran, and came to America when she was 5 years old. She holds an MFA in fiction from Bennington College and a Ph.D. in English from Princeton University. Now a professor of English and creative writing at California College of the Arts, she lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her family and is working on a novel set in 1920s San Francisco. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Welcome to the guest chair, Jasmin.
Oh, thank you so much. So happy to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited. And so is everyone else that I've told that you are going to be on here. So thank you.
I love it. Great.
So when I talk to my guests, I really love to hear their journey from the beginning. So I would love it if you could tell us how your creative journey started.
Well, it's hard to know exactly where to pinpoint the beginning, but I think part of me always had wanted to write, but I came from an immigrant family. I was 5 years old when my parents and I came from Iran. That was at the time of the revolution. And like a lot of Iranians of my generation, there was so much emphasis on becoming a lawyer or a doctor or, in some way attaining a certain kind of material and professional success. And the utter antithesis to that would have been a life in the arts or a life in writing. So I would say not only was I not encouraged, I was actively discouraged from from pursuing that. And the closest I got, I actually did go to law school. So I was in some, to some extent, I did carry out that wish of my parents, but I quickly realized it wasn't for me, and I went to graduate school in English. And even that was for my parents, a really unorthodox move. Becoming an academic, it was, it wasn't thought, that wasn't the dream. That wasn't what I was supposed to do. And then I'd say, really formally, it took a long time. I was in graduate school, and I had the experience that I've heard other writers will explain their writing sometimes in this way, that I was reading so much, and I was reading because I was hungry for a representation of my kind of experience. That would be an immigrant story, a story of a Iranian woman, a story of a Middle Eastern girl coming of age in America. And I just couldn't find enough stories to satisfy my own need. And Toni Morrison has this wonderful line that if you can't find the book you want to read, you have to write it. something along those lines. And so I was working on a study of Iranian American writing, and I just took it upon myself to kind of in tandem with that exploration, set down my family's own experience. And that's kind of that's where it started. And I started with personal essays. I wasn't thinking book. And then at one point, my mom discovered that I was writing, and I have a very, very, very vivid memory of the day. She discovered some of my papers on my desk, or even in a drawer, and I was in a writing group at that time, and she actually showed up at my writing group, and and she was horrified and so angry because I had been writing about her, and she felt that was not my right, that I had no right to write. I mean, she was opposed to my writing even about my own experience, but the act of writing about her life was something she was really really quite livid about. So that put things on hold for a while. But then, something really peculiar happened, which is that I kept writing. I kept writing these personal essays about myself, really not bringing my family into it. And then my mom, I think she was sort of appraising me, or she was she was watching me as I was, pursuing writing in that way. And she came to me and actually proposed that we work on a book together. And that book became a memoir called The Good Daughter. And that really is her story. I mean, I only appear, I think, somewhere after page 260 or something like that, So here's a story that, it's a story that really she had not told me when I was growing up. It's a story about her having a child when she was 13 and having to give that child up, as was common in Iran in the 1950s when she was a young woman. That was a common experience if a woman divorced, that she gave up her child. So it was a long-held secret. She didn't tell anybody. She didn't tell any of her friends in America. But one day she up and decided that she was ready to tell it to me, and that she not only was ready to tell it to me, but she was ready for it to be published. So that was certainly, I was in it by that point. And that was about 8 years ago, and I've kept going since.
So when the book came out, well, actually before the book came out, so when you were working on it, like when you work with someone to write a memoir, like how hard was it to get the story that both of you agreed on? Like, does that make it difficult writing about someone else who's still alive?
Absolutely. And this is why, I teach creative writing, and I really counsel my students not to write memoirs about their family while their family members are still alive, And, I think writers really struggle with this. If you're writing about your family, even if you're writing neutral material about your family, a lot of family members just don't want to be written about. And so it can be a really vexed subject. I'll answer also from a writer's point of view, from a creative person's point of view. It's really hard to work under those circumstances because, to a degree, I was allowing her to control the material. Well, certainly she was controlling what she was telling me, but there was an unspoken agreement that if it really got to a point, if there was some event that was too difficult for her to tell about, or an interpretation on my part that did not ring true to her, that I would concede, and I would let her version of the story be the one that went down in the book. And it's hard enough already to write, but then to have someone actually right next to you, right? Sort of, even just, even if she's not saying anything. And my mother was not the sort of person to not say anything. I mean, she let me know she wanted to see drafts all along. And, there was a lot there. I have a friend who tells me you should write a book about what it was like to write that book, because, it really almost just wrecked me, and it did. It's at certain moments, it really got very uncomfortable in our relationship, So I don't recommend it. On the other hand, it was also this really once in a lifetime experience. I sat down with my mom. She told me this extraordinary story. She was able to transport me to an Iran that doesn't exist anymore. Her memories were so vivid. It was really an exceptional experience to sort of plunge into the Iran of her childhood with her, and to also, in the course of doing that, then also tell a story that I think challenges certain certain American ideas of who Iranians are, and what Iranian women are like. All of that was really gratifying to me.
I read one of your other essays, The Summer I Disappeared, where you kind of talk about moving to LA because you lost
Oh,
your
yeah.
virginity and your mom got upset. And you mentioned in that essay that you didn't talk about that in The Good Daughter and towards the end because you were worried about how Americans would react negatively to the abuse. So I guess I was curious, just like, one, how did the Iranians kind of react to like, oh, you're sharing our secrets, but also like, how does living in America impact you being able to now tell these stories?
About my own secrets, as you mentioned, the piece I wrote for Shondaland is a story I couldn't tell when I was writing The Good Daughter, in part because The Good Daughter, I think of as my mom's book, and she had so much more control over that book. And also I wasn't ready. I think you need to be ready. My mom was ready. I wasn't fully ready to tell certain stories. And part of it, as you mentioned, was this fear, because now I'm writing at a time, it's after 9/11, where there's so much Islamophobia and there's so much sort of really galling representations of Middle Easterners and Muslims, that I did worry about contributing to that or affirming it in some way. So that essay is about losing my virginity and being really very harshly punished. But then again, that story is, I had not seen anyone writing about that, and maybe it's out there. I just didn't encounter it, but it was really interesting how many Iranian women reached out to me over social media or, over Facebook. And there was a real feeling of, well, first of all, I can't believe you told that story, but also, oh my God, thank you. Because, while I can't tell you exactly how it went down for me, it went down for me. I know, what this was. I had a version of it happen to me. And there's another moment where I just feel like, okay, my work for the day here is done, because I know for me that reading something like Roxane Gay's book, Hunger, if you haven't encountered it, but Roxane Gay writes about sexual abuse, and I am so blown away by her bravery. And when I encounter work that's that close to the bone, that takes that kind of risk, that is that shameless in a sense, and I mean that with real respect, she's gotten to this place where she's going to tell the story. And in some sense, I think you really have to be beyond the story to be telling the story. It doesn't own her. You feel like she can tell it because it does. Well, when you read work like that, I think it can really free you just in the act of reading it. There's, at the very least, I think you look at something like Roxane Gay's Hunger and you think, oh my God, I'm so grateful that someone just put that down. Even if you're not rushing to the page to tell your story, it diffuses this shame and this secrecy that is so crippling. I mean, I would say particularly for women, issues of sexuality and abuse are so crippling. And to hear another woman tell a story or to read an account of abuse is very empowering to the people who read it.
So, I want to step back a little bit. So you, like you just mentioned, you were getting your Ph.D. So you got your Ph.D. and your MFA. I guess which one comes first when you want to be a writer, or do you need them both, or how did you decide which one to get when?
Well, when I was in college, I graduated from UCLA in the mid-90s. I had never heard of an MFA program. It would probably be 10 years before I heard that acronym, MFA program. I mean, it was just nothing. There were a lot fewer of them. But then, in my in my community, and it was just something I had never ever heard. I never knew you could go to school to become a writer. I didn't know that was possible, which is, I think, good, because the education going through a doctoral program, just the rigor of that, the extraordinary amount of books that you have to read in order to get that degree. I think I started writing a little bit later than some people. I started my professional career as a writer started in my early 30s, um, and but it didn't take me as long to get going because I had read so much, and there was a sort of, I think if you have that kind of it leaves a mark on you, and I think you have a really good sort of handling of elements of story and what voices, and so you're learning craft without necessarily implementing it all along, and so I think it really served me well to have that education, and the MFA was, really, I wanted to teach creative writing, and it was really, the MFA was really in service of that, of teaching in an MFA program, but a wonderful experience. I mean, it was this dream experience of, so much support and encouragement. My mentors were so fantastic, and I was really just so grateful to be in a place where writing mattered, and that's true. It's just wonderfully validating to find a community as a writer, and that's what my MFA program gave me.
So I want to step really far back to something you said when we first started talking. Like you started practicing law and you had your law degree. I guess, what was that moment when you finally decided like you wanted to go write? Like, was there an actual incident that happened, or was it just sitting at your desk one day thinking, this is not what I want to do?
I only worked in the law for about 6 months. I knew, even as even when I was in law school, I knew that it was not the path for me. It's not suited to my temperament. And so when I was working, I was also sending out applications for Ph.D. programs. So I was already like one foot out the door of that. But the moment when was the moment where I was really struggling with my dissertation, as people do struggle. Sometimes it takes a long time, particularly in the humanities, because job prospects are so low. So there isn't always a lot of incentive to finish early. I was struggling finishing my PhD, and I wanted a creative outlet. And I remember one day, I'm in the same house that I was living in at that time. So I'm looking out the window, and I'm remembering a conversation I had with my neighbor who had just published a book. I saw her in the street. I think she was gardening. I said, "Jeannie, how's it going?" And she told me she'd published a book. Now, there's another moment where the heavens opened, or sort of something really radical shifted, because to me, writing was this exalted vocation, and I had never met a writer. And the idea that literally next door, my neighbor had published a book, it blew my mind, and it really inspired me. I mean, it was a really critical moment. That moment, that exchange I had with my neighbor, and she told me how she got started was in a writing workshop in our community. And I think it was not long, maybe it was even the next day, that I signed up for that same workshop. And I was in that writing workshop for 2 years. I didn't think I was writing a book, but I showed up every Friday night, and I read, we each got 5 minutes where we could read our writing for the week. And I lived for those Friday nights. I really loved the writing, but I also really loved feeling that my writing might mean something to people, and the people in that group were so encouraging. So that was also really critical, entering a writing community and really feeling supported.
So on your journey, what are some of the personal challenges you faced and the lessons learned?
That's a really expansive question. Um, something that I feel in my case, I had to get out of my own way. I spent so long, it's this imposter syndrome that I was talking about earlier. I mean, I just spent so long undermining myself, second guessing myself, putting things off, which is a way of doing violence, I think, to your creative self, is to procrastinate and put things off. And so I try, and I still struggle to do the work and to get out of my own way. So to think less about what this means for my ego, what people are going to think, if it's going to sell or whatever, and to let the story come out, to not impede it, because I think I was for a really long time. That's one thing. I think of writing a novel as almost like you're moving to another planet, and it's hard to move to another planet, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's sort of like psychically, right? Or, you just spend so much time in your imagination, and it demands so much time over so many years. And that's really hard to square with family commitments. In my case, it's to my teenage son and to a much greater extent to my mother. Yeah. So these are the challenges I face right now. I wanted to say something. It was actually something that sparked in my mind earlier, but I think it helps me a lot to think about the bigger stakes in what I'm doing, or, a sort of bigger why. So if I look at, let's say, my mom's life or my grandmother's life or women's lives in Iran, for much of our history, it has been very dangerous to write a book. And I think of women and all people in Iran, I mean, the censorship that they're up against. And I think, get to work. You have an opportunity, that really has not existed. I mean, it just, to some extent, it doesn't exist at all. And in the country you come from. And I think maybe that's something that does help an immigrant writer or a writer who's not coming from mainstream America. I mean, to feel like what an incredible, historically, revolutionary opportunity you have. Yeah. Here we are at a moment where someone like me can write a book. In my family, that hasn't been possible until now, So, I do try to think about that. I try to think about, how lucky I am and to make good use of the opportunities that I have. I had various people who were interested in the book, editors, and it would, depending on what was happening, what was happening in the news, Iran was hot or it wasn't, Iran was like all over, and suddenly it's like, all, that's all anybody wanted. And then you get the sort of spate of stories, and then nobody was interested in you at all, and that was really, really frustrating. It was really, really frustrating. And so, I suppose I haven't been privy, if there have been, the really nasty things. I guess I haven't encountered it where someone has really overtly shut a door in front of my face. But I do think the market is kind of like a door, and the market can be very harsh to people of color. It can be very it can be very cruel. It can say there can only be one of you. Right? I mean, it doesn't say that about white American male writers. There can be thousands of you, and there are thousands of you, but it's like, oh, we only can have like one or two of your kind at a time. And that's really frustrating, and it's not overt, but I do think it is. I think that is a factor, I definitely think it's
Right.
something that we
Yeah. I
contend
feel like
with.
that's in any creative space right now. They're like, oh, we already have our brown or female comedian or a Muslim comedian. We don't need any more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like there's this sort of quota system out there. Yeah. Oh, really frustrating.
Do you think it's going to change or that we can change it?
This is why I love teaching literature because I feel like as a writer, I don't actually have the power. I can I can write a really fantastic. I hope I can write a really fantastic book, but I can't actually make
Mhm.
anyone read it. My publisher can put a lot of money into, uh, you know, getting the book out there, but they can't actually make anyone pick it up and buy it, right? But as a professor, when I teach literature, I can actually make people read. So I think that's that's where I don't know. That's where I get my I don't know. I feel like I
Mhm.
can make some kind of real change. I mean, measurable, like in my lifetime, even over the course of a day. I can feel like I made a dent in this thing. And there's really is just nothing more fantastic than somebody telling you some version of, you made me see things. You made me see things that I didn't know I cared about. You made me see that it's so much more complicated. And so that's why I teach. So that's the only sort of way that. But I do think that I worry a little bit because I do think that, if you flip through poets and writers, or if you look in the New York Times, there's a lot more coverage of women writers, more coverage of writers of color. I worry a little bit if it's faddish, and if we're going to swing back to a moment where it's not cool. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I will say that I feel like the events of the last couple of years since the election in 2016, I mean, there's a real, seems like on the part of some people at least, I mean, there's a genuine curiosity. And if you read a book like, I don't know if you know Jasmin Ward's work, she has a book called Men We Reaped. It's about her community in Mississippi and four young African American men who died. Well, I think when we see the news, I think many people's natural sort of inclination is to say, I want to understand that better. And I think books are still the place we go. So that's been that's been really meaningful to me is to see that writers are young writers, older writers too, are and maybe especially in this moment where everything's about sound bites. And I mean, there's a wisdom in a book that you just can't get in a newspaper, or a little clip or a tweet or whatever. So I think it's a harrowing moment, but I think we've also seen how much literature can bring to terrible times like these.
So, what advice do you have for creatives on their journey?
Creatives on their journey, read a lot, or whatever your, I think you really want to set your mind is your instrument, and I think you really want to be reading the best kind of book for you. So in my case, I read I read the best historical fiction I can. I read it with a writer's eye. I'm really looking at it in a critical way, thinking about how is this thing put together. I think it's really important to educate yourself on how to read as a writer, and not just as a reader. And then I think something like that was so transformative for me was taking a class, finding a mentor, finding a community. That made all the difference for me, and I've seen it do that for my students as well. It doesn't have to be an MFA program, though it could be. For a lot of people, that is their writing community or where it starts, but it might just be a workshop, and whatever it is, somebody to hold you
Mhm.
accountable to yourself, and that might be a group or it might be one person, because I think everything is against you. As a creative person, I mean, the reality is most writers don't make their living by writing, so there's really just there's really very little at the end of a working day in you for creative work. And And I think there's just a lot of temptation and then also pressure to just, just watch, let's just watch something or so you really have to cultivate this doggedness about it, because I think it's so hard. You just have to be so crazily committed to your own success. You really have to be, against all evidence to the contrary. You just have to believe it's going to happen for you, and then you just got to do the work. So that's, what is that? 2 things, 3 things, 3 things. Tell the stories that you have to tell. And I mean, not just sort of the stories that maybe you think you can tell or you should tell, but, think about those stories. Like if you came to the end of your life and you didn't write this story, whether it's fictional or non-fictional, you would regret it deeply. I mean, that's the kind of story that I think will sustain you. You'll have a sense of the stakes that you're doing something important to you. So that's an exercise that I have my students go through. Is I have them sit down and I think, what are the 5 stories you have to tell in your lifetime? And then I tell them, of those 5, what are the 3, right? I'm just going to take 2 away from you, and now you've only got 3. And then you know where this is going. And then I say, well, you just get 1. And we have the next hour to write that story. We're going to do it right now. The trouble, as the Buddha said, is we think we have time. Yeah. I mean, you think, yeah, I'll write that, when the kids are growing up, or, when I retire from the law, or, and don't wait.
Yeah, that's great advice. Don't wait. That is good advice.
Don't wait.
So let's jump right into the lightning round. The lightning round, I'm going to ask you 5 questions, rapid fire, and just answer the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
So what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Be tenacious.
What is your definition of success?
Freedom.
Who inspires you and why?
Women, especially women who have been shunted off to the side or silenced.
What's a habit that's helped you on your journey?
A regular writing practice.
What do you want your legacy to be?
I want to write the kind of books I love to read.
Jasmin, if our listeners wanted to connect with you, where could they find you online?
Sure. I'm on Facebook. You can write to me at jasmindarznik@gmail.com. Instagram. It's hard for me to not be found. So you can find me easily, and I'm super happy to correspond with anybody who's got, questions, wants some advice. All that. It's a total pleasure.
Awesome. This has been such a pleasure. You've dropped so much knowledge today. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Oh no, don't even. You give us these readings that make us aspire to do more with our lives. So thank you. And there you have it, y'all. Thank you for tuning in. See you next week. Hey, before you hit pause, did you find this episode helpful and enjoyable? If so, could you leave an Apple Podcast, aka iTunes review? It'll take you less than 1 minute and mean the world to me. The more ratings and reviews the show gets, the more people are able to find this podcast. If you're unsure how to leave a review, no worries. If you're on your iPhone or iPad, go to the homepage of this show and scroll down to Write a Review. Click on it and you'll be able to rate and review the show. If you're on a Mac, from iTunes, go to the show homepage and on the top, click Ratings and Reviews. Also, please subscribe to get the latest episodes once they drop. If you enjoyed the episode and know someone who would love it, please share. From your iPhone, click on the icon with 3 dots and then share via social media, email, or text. If you want to hear more, head over to funnybrownGirl.com/podcast. You can also find me online. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Funny Brown Girl. Also, sign up for my free newsletter for more tips to advance your creative journey at funnybrownGirl.com/subscribe. And again, if you enjoyed the show, do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Now, go flex your creative muscle and keep winning. Thank you for listening. See you next week.